This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Cat 3 Academy coach Tom Donati. He discusses his journey to becoming an academy coach, what he's learnt by watching some of the best international teams such as Chile, Germany and Brazil, and the importance of having a collective vision in an academy. This podcast was also recorded over the internet, so may sound a little different to normal. I hope you enjoy. So, Tom, first of all, I appreciate you doing this a bit out of the blue. Obviously, Ollie, who's been on the podcast with me, kind of when I asked him if he knew anyone who might be interested, sent me your way. So, appreciate you doing that. I guess the first question is how's it being back on the grass, which all of us have been longing for the past 6 or 7 months?
Yeah, it's been very good to be back on the grass. I think, as I say, I think for the players as well as us, probably just that sort of desperation to get back out there, move a football around, just see a football being kicked around as well. It's obviously a passion of most of ours. So yeah, I think that's been a real relief, so to speak.
And then in terms of for you, kind of what's your current role? Like, what job are you in at the moment?
So in a full-time role, which is under 15s lead within a Cat 3 Academy in the Southwest. So I lead, like I say, the under 15s group. So last year we had a sort of combined 15-16s. This year we've split. Just lead that age group basically within the YDP.
So imagine working with that age group is kind of interesting because obviously they're a little bit older and kind of have, I guess, thoughts of themselves, if you like, and they would see what they see on TV and kind of, I guess, would want to reenact that to a certain degree. How did you find going into that age group and working with lads of those ages?
I guess to give a little bit of sort of, I guess, background, the last sort of 10 years I've actually spent in the PDP, so with 18s up, 23s and first team, and then so I've kind of dropped down the ages, if that makes sense. But like you say, they've got I love the personalities that you have. You've also got that sort of growth and maturation stage, so they're sort of slightly awkward as well, but I love dealing with that, and I love being around that and making them feel a little bit more awkward, but also making myself feel awkward, putting myself in vulnerable situations as well. I think that's always amusing. But yeah, I think it's a great age to work with, great age group to work with, in my opinion. Like you say, they're starting to sort of emulate. I mean, everyone sort of watches a player, don't they, at a young age and looks to them and goes, "Oh, I want to be like so and so." But I think at that older age, they're starting to look towards real icons in their minds, and like you say, try to emulate what they do.
And was there anything that surprised you when you dropped down into that age group? Was there anything that surprised you kind of working from what you thought it looked like on the outside?
Not really, only because the last 2 roles that I had, effectively the last 3 roles I had were overseeing a whole academy. So I guess I've got lots of insight in that. It wasn't a surprise, so to speak. But what I will say is that geographically, every region is challenging in itself, which is interesting. I never thought that England was so diverse within its counties, etc. But yeah, you get real different challenges in different parts of the country, which is interesting.
Okay, so also you alluded to there kind of a lot of different experiences, and I guess in different areas and stuff as well. Do you want to talk about maybe your journey to obviously maybe, I assume, finishing playing, because that's how most coaches get into it, in terms of they play and then they decide to move across, and then kind of what your coaching journey looked like to where you are now?
Yeah, so and intercept any time, obviously, but I played sort of non-league, never played professionally, and at a young age got rejection at sort of 15 years old, really, from 2 academy teams, and then sort of didn't fall out of love with it, but felt that I was probably better than I was, or assumed that I was better than I was. and then sort of stopped playing for a little while, I guess at around 16, and then a coaching course came up, which was basically like a full-time scholarship really, alongside coaching. And the coach that was leading it I'd had as a young boy, and he was excellent, and so that really sort of inspired me to go down the coaching route, and then doing 2 years on that, playing football every day, and again, like I say, playing sort of just non-league, really inspired me. Like, he was inspiring as a coach, to be honest, and inspired me to want to, like, my passion is really trying to develop people.
What was so inspiring about him?
His passion and enthusiasm for helping individuals grow was unreal. And at the time, so when I was a young lad, sort of 10, 12 years earlier, he was obviously a bit younger, but when it came to me being sort of 16, 17, he was probably about 60 odd years old, but still had more enthusiasm than any of us. And it was just unreal. And obviously his knowledge of the game was excellent as well. Taught myself and everyone else loads. But yeah, his enthusiasm and his passion for improving us. I don't think I ever felt like he was ridiculing or having a go. He would be critical, but I never ever felt like he was being disrespectful, if that makes sense. He had a really good manner about him as well.
And how do you think he developed that? Do you know what his background was, or was it just that he'd always worked in that type of role?
So he was high up in the FA, so he worked as a coach educator in the FA, like quite high up, and I guess he had his own views, definitely his own views, as we all do. But I think just really through what he said is more default than design, in terms of having lots of experiences that then gauged how he might have to deal with people. He went from managing sort of non-league teams to managing a professional team to then non-league teams again. And I guess the difference is in situations and scenarios where you've got your players and that's all you've got, you know that you've got to get the best out of them somehow. So sometimes you have to change rather than they, you know that they aren't going to change as such. But yeah, so he sort of kicked me onto my coaching journey really. And then from there, I started working for lowly little Wycombe Wanderers that they were at the time, which is a team that he managed previously, and just doing some community work. And they didn't have academies weren't what they are now, nothing like. There was sort of centre of excellences, and yeah, so I started working within that. Then started working for Chelsea after that, and again they had loosely an academy, but it was more of a centre of excellence. So I worked at Wycombe for a few years, then worked at Chelsea for a few years. Then came across a really good coach, and he offered me a quite a strange, and when I say strange, at the time it was very ahead of its time, so that's why I say strange, but an opportunity to work with Charlton Athletic under 16s girls. And at the time they were so far ahead of everyone else. And again, he was a good role model for me. So I sort of took up that opportunity as well. So I worked there for a little while. And then things led on. So then I took over a non-league team. We were really successful for sort of 5 years that I was there. I sort of said to them that I wanted to commit to 5 years and change the club, and their highest league position had been 17th. They weren't relegated because I think the team in the league below couldn't get the ground graded. So we managed to stay in the league, and then had consecutively high finishes. So, and then I'm in the 5th year, won league and cup. And like I say, that was a huge learning curve. And the coach that I mentioned, Jim Kelman, the one that took me on at a young age, he had always said to me to really grow and grasp as a coach, sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone, and loads of people say that. And the non-league thing, from going from professional environments, or what were deemed to be, to going to a non-league club, and I remember him saying, players will tell you exactly what they think when you're there, whereas when you're in an academy they can't tell you what they think. And it's so true. So you put on a session that's average, and they'll tell you know about it.
What club did you go to?
The semi-pro team, or not semi-pro, but non-league. It was a team called Hollyport. So took them over. They were Hellenic League, which is like I say, I think step 4 or step 5. But yeah, it was like a real lowly. I think average attendance was like one man and his dog, and that actually grew. Believe it or not, one man and 2 dogs. But it was like I say, a real learning curve in terms of just facilities, equipment, doing things that you probably never expected to do as a coach, but now all of a sudden you're having to do.
And what was the reason for you making that jump? Because, like you said, for a lot of people, they'd probably see it as working, in that Cheltenham Academy is quite a nice setup. I imagine, at the time in particular, Cheltenham were probably doing quite well as a club. So then dropping down to that level where essentially you're having to organise a hell of a lot and trying to get hold of equipment and kit and stuff is challenging. What was the reason behind making that transition?
Yeah, it was mainly, I guess, for self-development, really. I'm not one to, so I like to feel challenged. So it was almost like, and not to say that Charlton wasn't challenging at all, but it was almost like a jump in a deep pool without any armbands on, and thinking, right, how am I going to get myself through this? And like Jim had said to me years before as well, is you'll really know your sort of worth and your value, and yeah, you can recruit some players that are good at sort of non-league levels and those sort of levels, but also you have to manage and you have to coach and you have to put strategies in place that will adapt and hopefully come to fruition. And like I say, I think I did that over 5 years, which was pleasing to see, but also pleasing with the players that have gone on and gone and actually played at a better level, and won half decent things as well. So yeah, it was pleasing. From there, I then, so at the same time I was doing some coach education stuff with the FA as well. So that was something that sort of interested me, as I say, developing people. And then a role at Watford came along, so I started working at Watford, and it was when Watford were not in their junior years by any stretch, but it was before the EPPP, and it was when the EPPP was actually based around what Watford did, so that they had the Harefield Academy, which was like a full-time programme, and it was, I mean, an unbelievable environment to be working in, certainly as my first, and that was an academy, and as my first sort of academy role, so to speak, like official academy, it was, yeah, an unbelievable environment with the staff, with the players, with the opportunity, because of the foresight and the vision of the club. Little things like the motivation for us as even part-time academy coaches, but just we had to get so many players out on the first team pitch on every Saturday. That was our achievement, our role. So to have that sense of worth, even as a part-time academy coach, I found extremely motivating.
And how did they like break that down for you? How did they sell that vision to you? Was that quite early on where they said to you, this is what our expectations are? Or was it filtered in, or how did that look?
Yeah, and this is, again, like I say, I've been really fortunate on my journey, because a certain Mr. Nick Cox was the academy manager at the time, and John Stevenson was sort of director of football, and John and Nick sort of put in the early days when I was there, they got all the staff together, and it was like, look, this is our role, this is our task as the academy, and it was literally all the coaches in a room. How are we going to do it? So it was like literally a massive, probably 55-person army brainstorm. But obviously off the back of that, you come up with some excellent ideas, some excellent conversations, and you start to filter some real good, honest conversations as well that break down loads of barriers straight away.
Like what?
Well, so, I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, Mike, lots of people in football have their own sort of agendas. And I think that breaks down, when you've got a clear vision, I think that breaks down a lot of individual and personal agendas straight away, because all of a sudden, like I say, if you're not motivated to be part of that, you're probably in the wrong game in terms of youth development. Because if you can't be sold, like, listen, this is our job, is to get sort of like 55% of the starting 11 have got to be Watford Academy graduates. Like, if you can't get sold on that, you shouldn't be in youth development probably. So yeah, I think breaking down those barriers, but also the barriers of uncertainty and clarity was so clear. Like, by the end of that sort of brainstorming sessions, everything was so clear as to what we were doing, why we were doing it. Yeah, which was again a testament to the two guys that ran it, really.
And did it go in like a philosophy thing, like in terms of style of play and all that type of stuff, or was it a bit more generic than that?
It was really based around there was a Watford way, so to speak, but it wasn't like so strongly adhered to that you couldn't tweak things or change things. It was really based around the player and what was needed for that player at that certain moment. But we did have, like, there was 6 weekly programs, so there was plans in place as well. So it wasn't totally random. There was periodization in lots of forms, like back then as well, where psych and sports science weren't as big as they are now, dare I say, but we had like excellent sports science approach and that backed up all those areas. And like I say, that's why the EPPP, I guess, came in and looked at what we were doing and sort of built a lot of what they've done around it.
And was there anything that you kind of took away from that in particular moving forward in your roles, or was there anything that you thought that you implemented particularly well that you've tried to take with you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I say, I think a togetherness was huge. Like I say, my first academy role, I felt like walking out of that meeting, I felt like I was like the first team manager. Do you know what I mean? But I think, like, there was a sense of not just me, everyone kind of did, because they just felt like they were such a big part of the club. And I think that's crucial. So definitely, I've definitely tried to sort of take that with me. And then clarity, like I say, that it was so crucial, like the clarity in like, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is how we're going to look to achieve it, but the vision is this might come in the way, and what do we need to do, how do we adapt, how do we change, and like I say, also working between age groups. So it was never, look, he's the 18s coach or the 23s coach or whatever, you can't have a conversation with him. It was always like, make sure you do have a conversation and it's really clear what ex-players' strengths are, so that we all are working to get him into the first team situation, basically. So I think clarity really was huge, that sort of structure, but based, underpinned by clarity.
What age group were you working with then?
So I started off with the under 10s, I think it was, and then I sort of bumped up. So I went under 10s, 13s, 15s, and then sort of assisted the 18s for a little while.
And then, obviously, when you started out and you're having those conversations, who were the 18s and 23 coaches?
So Dave Hughes was the 18s coach at Watford for a while. Excellent, again, really good, and again, someone that would have conversations, would also say, no, this is what, like, that's coaching, isn't it? Is that you've got opinions, but also his opinion was the final one, obviously within his age group. Sorry, but and I think that's important. And then there were a couple of ex-pros as well at the time that were sort of doing their B license / A license and sort of helping out with the 23. So they were actually, really interestingly, John Eustace specifically used to come to the academy sessions and sort of ask for loads of information, which was quite unusual, if you know, in terms of someone who was playing at the time, and he's asking for loads of information from Johnny Random in Tom Donati, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was really interesting, and he was sort of doing a bit of coaching whilst he was coming to the end of his playing days as well.
Obviously, like you mentioned there, it's quite important for you as a staff to be able to have those relationships. Is there anything you particularly learn being able to speak to those type of characters? That maybe if you're an under-10s coach, I mean, you're talking to people that are working with players 8 to 10 years older than you are. But was there anything you particularly learned and you took away from that period of time?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think the timing of your conversations is because obviously as a young enthusiastic coach and being given that sort of dare I say it, power to be able to go and speak to people in higher roles or within the hierarchy of the club. You can get, and I definitely did on many occasions, you can get the timing wrong of those conversations. And it's almost like whatever you say, even if you told someone you've got the best player in the world in your age group and this is why he's the best player in the world, if you get the timing wrong, it doesn't matter who he is or what it is. It's just like a big So
I think that before the FA Youth Cup, basically.
yeah, absolutely. And I think definitely I've tried to, as much as I can, take that with me. Definitely, because that you kind of, I've had my fingers burnt on a couple of occasions, and you kind of think, like, take the ego out of it. It's not me that's missing out; it's the player. If you know what I mean. So you kind of go, oh no, I've kind of ruined by just missing that time, and I've kind of ruined his opportunity.
Have you got an example of one?
I've got an example of two probably, but I guess a lad at Watford that I felt was a very, very good player, and probably, like I say, just the timing of it was like we were currently looking for players in his position in the age group above. So this is when I was the 15s coach, and I was kind of saying, like in my head as well, I was kind of thinking that he's better than what we're seeing. But when there's that pressure to recruit as well, you kind of see different things, don't you? But and I probably not. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't released, so fortunately it wasn't like that bad. But I probably in the next sort of 3 months negated his opportunity to step up and play in the 16s by simply having a conversation at the wrong time and kind of going, look, I think, and probably the information that I gave as well, I think he's better than what we're seeing. I think he does the X, Y, and Z, and I think we need to review it. And it was kind of like a big no-no. And then he probably sat in my opinion, the wrong team for the next 2 or 3 months. But that's also for other coaches to look at as well, to be fair. But yeah, I think that would be the biggest example.
Well, like you said, sometimes those egos as well, it can be challenging to circle back round or have an awareness of going, actually, he's trying to do something good. He's not trying to be a pain, but he's just timed it wrong in terms of and one other things. And he comes in talking to me about little Timmy, who's a left back. And I don't need this right now.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
So when you've moved on from Watford, obviously you've been there for a number of years and worked your way up the ranks. What was your next role? What did you then go into?
So that was probably my first setback as such in coaching, because so Dave, before Dave came in, I sort of applied for his role, for the 18s role, and like, if I'm honest, I wasn't ready for it at all, but I felt that I was at the time, and I took that as a real setback. And then about 3 months later, I was offered the 18s role at Barnet, and that was sort of where I thought I wanted to be. So I took up that role, and so I was offered, like I say, the 18s role. Did that for 2 years, and that was again a real interesting. It's one of those that you look at the club from the outside, especially now, real challenging time. But like, I can't speak well enough of the opportunities that I was given at that football club, in terms of everything, really. There were challenging times, don't get me wrong, but the opportunities were absolutely unreal. So yeah, I was really fortunate, again, looking back, to have taken that role. And And again, I guess a lot of people sort of looked at that and thought, oh, Watford, and still even now, I guess people look at my CV sometimes and go, Watford to Barnet, are you sure? But I mean, as I say, we were a Cat 2 academy at the time, and we majorly overachieved. Teams would see us rock up in our minibus that was like a three-wheeler, and you could tell they were just like, here we go, boys, got a hat trick in me today. Here come the Barnet fellas, and we sort of finished mid-table. Not that winning is everything, but a few of the players have gone on and had good careers, which is the main thing. Already at young ages, so like played 100+ league games and stuff like that. So that's for me a marker of what's good.
What was good about the opportunities you had whilst you were there?
Well, I mean the ability, obviously. So the same day as I went to Barnet, I think there was a slightly bigger signing in terms of Edgar Davids also signed on the same day.
I'm a Spurs fan, so this is really, really interesting.
Yeah, so I think the press were more worried about him than me. So to work with someone like that was obviously a huge opportunity. But I genuinely mean this also. Mark Robson, that was there at the time, that probably got a little bit ill-treated, was also excellent. And to be able to watch him work every day and see what he was doing in very, very difficult circumstances, and how he held himself was unreal. He was a real testament as a real good guy in midst of a storm, really. So that was sort of a real opportunity to see someone like that work, and then just things which I look back and think like kind of unbelievable in a sense, because the chairman basically used to sort of hire out part of the Hive, the training centre. So like we had international teams and big European teams come and train all the time. But one of the sort of, not stipulations, if you like, but we were never told that we couldn't go and watch. We were never told that we couldn't be around it. And something that I definitely learned is, and I've tried to get the timing better, definitely, but is I will always ask the question, because I think I don't want to miss a moment where I could have been in around something, whereas I'm just going to stand by and watch, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I mean, we had Germany came and trained there, so I spent sort of day pitch side just watching them train. Danish national team.
Who was in
Brazil.
the Germany team at the time, or who was coaching the Germany team at the time?
So Joachim Loyer was the coach, and then you've got you had Bierhoff. So it was 2013-14. So you had that sort of, Bierhoff was coming to the end. He was sort of player coaching, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, it was actually not a bad time, not at all. But it was probably the end of an era for the Germans, if that makes sense, and it was just before they started renewing. But big Manuel Neuer obviously in goal. But I mean, just to see them work, and when you think of like efficiency, and my word, it was like incredible just to see the coaches work, the players, the timings of everything. Like, absolutely.
Differences between what you would, what in this country we'd assume like a first team session would look like, to what theirs was like?
Not specifically. Just, I guess, just the efficiency, as I say, and the focus from the team was unreal. Like, absolutely unreal. Like, for me, only on a level with another international team that I was fortunate enough to watch, which was Chile. And again, two extremely successful international groups. Yeah, and like I say, not at all disrespectfully, but just not. They were those two international teams were on a different level of, like I say, the timings were just, everything was absolutely like clockwork. It was like if a ball was misplaced, it would be sort of like gunned on. It was like, just, it's so efficient.
And was
And
there
then
anything that surprised you in terms of the players and stuff? Because obviously, when you're looking from the outside, looking in at those top players, you probably get a certain perception of what they're like or how they act. Was there anyone that particularly surprised you, even in maybe their performance or the way they acted or how they were like actually pitch side?
do you mean across the board or just with the German group?
Go across the board. Yeah, we can
Um,
go through the other teams you've been because it'd be interesting to see how many groups you had in there. But yeah, just across the board, if there's anyone that.
yeah, across the board, the outstanding for me by a country mile was Alexis Sanchez. Like absolutely outstanding. So because I speak a little bit of Italian, half Italian, so he was at Barcelona at the time, and they were playing England on the Friday night, and I think he played on the Sunday night for Barca and came to training on the Tuesday, and the rest of the team were warming up, and he was doing pitch runs. Um, and Sampaoli was their manager at the time, and I sort of like one of our players actually said to me that like Tom, can go and ask him if why he's doing pitch runs and he's not doing the warm up with the rest of the team, and so I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll go and ask him, like being a bit cheeky. But we were actually training with them. So they were using the youth team when I was a youth team manager. So they used me and they used the players literally as sort of moving mannequins against them. And it did feel like moving mannequins, I'm telling you. But yeah, and he basically said, I played, I think it was like 84 minutes or 82 minutes. I only played 82 minutes on Sunday night for Barca, so I've got to top myself up. And I was like, okay. And so I went back to the lads and I was like, yeah, he just said because he'd only played 82 minutes, so he needs to top up. And they were like, yeah, that's like 8 minutes short. What's he like? Why is he topping himself up? And it was like that. I mean, it was unreal. So they did. I remember they did a crossing and finishing practice, and basically the coach Sampaoli never said to him, "This is what you need to do." But when the ball was on the left-hand side and he was on the right, when the ball was over the other side, he was doing box-to-boxes just to keep himself ticking whilst the ball was being played down the other side. And honestly, he was like, when you say first in, last out, it was literally religiously, he wanted to be the last one on the pitch, doing whatever he needed to do, whatever he felt he needed to do. Just an absolute machine. And then obviously he then moved to Arsenal not too long after that, and sort of, I think, did very well in the Premier League. But I think he was a good player at Barca as well. But just to see that in the flesh, I think he was the standout player for me that I saw real class.
And did that have any effect on you or your players seeing that type of like dedication, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this stupidly. Like I've genuinely, I'm one to try and push players. So like I was more pleased to see that, and pleased that the players that we were with at the time, that I was with at the time, saw that, because that's something that I would encourage anyway. And like genuinely at Watford again, there were 2 or 3 players that we used to get told off and have to pull them in from the pitch in the 18s group, because it was like, oh, we need to stop them doing this, stop them doing that. They've done enough now. So sometimes, don't get me wrong, sometimes you've got to be sensible, obviously, but yeah. So to see that, like I say, and also to see then his, what you might deem as a bit of a rise as well, in terms of however you want to see the game, in terms of playing in the Premier League, or, I mean, they went on and won 2 the Copa Americas. So just to see his success as well within football, you kind of go, is it chance? I don't think so, if you know what I mean. And then he gets a big money move to Man United, and so you kind of look at it, whether you look at football as finance, if that's the motivator, or the love for the game and winning things, then you kind of go, well, he's somehow balanced that pretty well.
And it's interesting because obviously you hear his comments recently about United and kind of realising after the first day of not wanting to be there and seeing they could do a trade back. And I always think kind of what we said there is you look at it, and sometimes players get a bad rep for whatever reason. And Sanchez probably has been one of those players that's got a bit of a bad rep. People are saying, he's taking home a wage and all that sort of stuff and hasn't done anything. But they probably wouldn't know that he does all those extra bits in the background.
Yeah.
And so kind of, it'd be interesting to see culturally if there was a culture that he didn't like at the club at the time, or what it looked
Yeah,
like.
yeah, I think that's a really good point because, like you say, it's so easy, isn't it, from the outside to go, oh, and don't get me wrong, we've all done it, myself included, at times, and you look, like I say, from the outside, and you go, oh, what's he doing? Why is he acting like that? And like you say, it might be that he's got into an environment where he's like, oh no, what have I brought myself in for? And even if I am on, I don't know, £300,000 a week reportedly, like that's not what motivates him, and that's not what infuses him day to day. So there's only so much of that that's going to keep you ticking over, isn't there?
And I think what's also interesting is you said there about him doing the top ups. If you'd asked me, kind of from my experiences, why he was over there, I would have said it's probably because he didn't fancy joining in a session because he has to recover.
Yeah,
Whereas actually the polar opposite, he's gone, no, 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 before I can join in, I need to make sure that I'm
yeah,
where I need to be. So it's interesting, like the perception from the outside to the reality of what the actual reason is really, really unique, I think. But what
yeah.
other, was there a big difference between what the Chileans did and what the Germans did? Because I always find it interesting with like styles of football, particularly in World Cups. You see, South Americans all very good on the ball. I always say they're very good at turnings, 1v1s, being able to manipulate their body compared to, imagine the Germans physically very strong and dominant and all that type of stuff. Was there differences in the type of training they were doing or not particularly?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, I mean, Sampaoli was a sort of huge advocate of everything that Bielsa did as his predecessor, and so carried a lot of his work on. So, a lot of, if you've watched any of Leeds, a lot of the stuff that Leeds look like, Chile sort of look like, if that makes sense. But yeah, they look, like you say, they looked to dominate in sort of wide areas, to draw the game into little like 3v4s and then pop the ball out and switch it around. And what was so interesting and like what I'd class as proper elite about them, is sadly they beat England on the Friday night. But having worked with them all week, it was literally like the two goals that they scored were literally what they'd worked on all week repetitively, and it was just, don't get me wrong, we like I've worked in first teams and with first teams, and you work on things to obviously try and score goals in a certain manner, but the way that they did it was the most, like literally from the warm up, everything was building up to that end practice, and how that looked to score a goal. It was like incredible, like the detail that went into every part of the practice, if that makes sense.
Did it end in an 11v11, or was it, because I know Bielsa does a lot of small groups work, doesn't he? He does a lot of
Yeah,
like position specific type work. They'll work on particular passes or patterns, which then when you combine them all together like a jigsaw, obviously end up with like the end product. Were they similar to that, or did it end up in the 11v11? How did that look?
yeah, that is pretty much exactly what they did. Like literally from the warm up, it was like 1v1s, 2v2s. It like almost, it just, like you say, almost grew, and then the puzzle comes together. Um, I remember, and I felt so sorry for the lads. So we had like I say, we had 2 3v4s going on either side of the 18-yard box. So literally just outside the 18-yard box, on either side of the pitch. And I was sort of managing our players, our youth team players, and we were sending 4 players in against their 3. And basically our job was just to dog and dog and dog and try and win the ball back. And if we won the ball back, it was like, wow, we've won the ball back. But every 30 seconds, those players would change over to keep the intensity. And they obviously kept the same 3 players in. And that was, like I say, that was just incredible to see, like their intensity. Because don't get me wrong, our players weren't mugs. So they're chasing around, they're trying their hardest to try and win the ball. And probably not many touches, to be honest. But I mean, to be fair to them, their concentration levels were excellent. But just to see that even digressed and then progressed as well, and how they did that, and then how that looked to go and score a goal, like you say, was just a real excellent, really, experience for myself, and like you say, the players as well. Most importantly for them to
And
see that.
was there anything like subsequently that you added into your sessions to try and emulate what you'd seen, or was there anything that the players took away and gone, you know what, if I want to reach this level, these are the attributes I've got to go away and work on? Did you see any really uptake in either of those things?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely for both. So for myself, I think just the key detail of trying to make sure that a session runs through. So it's slightly different, I think, in academy, because you're not necessarily trying to win a game of football, but still you're trying to continue a theme, if that makes sense. So whatever that theme might be, and for each individual, that's the difference in academy, is for each individual you're trying to spin plates really, but to make sure that the theme carries through. And I sort of did that anyway, but just to hammer that home, like that really hammered it home for me. And then for the players, certainly, like I still speak to a number of the players that were in that youth team, and like I say, quite a few of them playing league football. And one of them actually said to me not too long ago, I mean, he's a really, really talented footballer. And he actually said to me not so long ago, he was like, "Oh, Tom, I just remember chasing them around." And but it was, again, he was one that saw, and we brought him in from non-league, and he was one that saw Sanchez doing the extras, and that was like, for him, that was a real eye-opener. So, and then seeing the intensity that they worked at and being in it as well, not just seeing the intensity, but actually being involved in it and chasing around, he was like, that's a game changer. And to be fair to him, he's knuckled down and doing all right. So hopefully it's been a good learning curve for him. Yeah.
And then, sorry, so you said you got Germany, Chile, and you mentioned, I think, Denmark as well?
Yeah, Denmark. We had the Brazilian national team as well. So again, that was excellent. So we were allowed sort of basically all access to that. That was so different, so different. In terms of, well, so Scolari was the manager, and it was almost like their 2 training sessions that they did. It was almost just like a cool down / but they were building up to a game against England again. But it was almost like a cool down / bit of fun, if you like. But I mean, again, sort of watching like literally pitch side rondos with Ronaldinho, David Luiz, Neymar. That was the group. Like, it was intense, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like fun and jokes, and like, it was intense and the ball was absolutely buzzing around, but just the difference in culture, I guess, and attitude between the Brazilians and the Germans and the Danish, it's so interesting to see, and the Chileans as well, like, just so interesting to see. But yeah, again, like I say, just really fortunate, and probably a bit too on the front foot of me sort of approaching Scolari and saying, "Look, I want to come and watch training." He's like, yeah, come and watch. And but again, I live by, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Have you always been curious or like that, or is that something that you've kind of developed as you got a little bit older?
No, I think I've always been sort of like I say, I've always wanted to help other people, but through helping other people, I've recognised that I also need to help myself. And whether it's the experience, whether it's the watching, and like you say with the Chileans, and seeing things and going, right, that's reinforced what my belief was, but actually that changes a lot of things for me. So yeah, that curiosity is always, my mind jumps. I'm quite arguably creative, so yeah, my mind jumps quite a lot. So I'll want to know a bit more about something. I'll definitely go and ask and say, and then that ties into the timing. I just need to get the timing right.
But I figure it's quite a good skill to have, because I mean, being able to go and approach these players / coaches or whatever, even just say something simple, can I stand by the side of the pitch and watch? A lot of people would be very reluctant to do that, I think, for wanting to impose or getting shut down, or being told to sling your hook or whatever. I think a few other people might just pretend to be groundsmen for a bit and end up watching.
Yeah, get the fork out.
I'm just doing this pivot in here just by the team talk or something like that. So it's quite, I imagine, quite a good skill to have in order to aid your development, to be able to go and just ask a question. If it's a no, all right, I'll go. But if it's a yes, you learn some invaluable experiences, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that's yeah. I don't really ever think of it like that in a way, but yeah, I guess I mean I like to think I'm respectful, so I wouldn't ever disrespectfully ask, if that makes sense, and obviously respect the answer that's given. So, like you say, if you're told to sling your hook, it's okay, no problem. But I also think I treat everyone equally. So I think whether it's Scolari or I don't know, a non-league football manager, if I'm intrigued by something, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, I mean that people will see Scolari as maybe more important because he's a World Cup winner or whatever. I think if I'm intrigued by something that I'm seeing or something that I think might add value to me and therefore other people, I would just always ask. I would simply just, but like I say, just in equality, really, just thinking I'm going to be respectful and ask, but at the same time, I kind of like what I'm hearing or seeing.
Yeah. I suppose if he's just a person, what's the worst answer?
Exactly. That's how I've always thought about it. And apart from probably Dennis Bergkamp or Zidane, I might think a little bit differently, but I don't think so, to be honest. I think everyone would probably be a bit like, oh no, he'll go and ask him, don't worry.
So then, in terms of, obviously, those guys are coming in infrequently and whatnot, but then linking back to someone you mentioned before, Edgar Davids has probably worked with a lot of those top coaches and obviously has played with some incredible players, particularly at Tottenham with your Robbie Keane. But what did you take away from him, both, I guess, on and off the pitch?
Hang on, you particularly at Tottenham, yeah? I like that. I love that. Forget Juve and Barca, particularly at Tottenham.
Yeah. Don't worry about those guys. It's what he learned when he was playing for
It's what he learned. Why Adelaide? I think what he showed, like, on a daily basis, is his standards for himself, definitely. So he was, I think, 39 when he signed. He was, yeah, because he turned 40 when he was there, definitely. So when he came in, he was 39. And the reason I say that is because his like, in physical shape, he was it was unreal. Don't get me wrong, he couldn't get around the pitch as he used to, but like, just an athlete, you just think, wow, at 39 years old type thing. So, but he was gymmed every day. He was in the gym every day, without fail. Good habits with his food. So little things like that, and that was obviously on the player front. Then he had a half decent team around him as well in terms of coaches. So learning, and again, that was really interesting to see the Dutch style, like very, very Dutch style. Very, very Raymond Verheyen, if you have heard of him, and very much based on periodization and how they sort of saw the game. Now, there was probably a slight downfall to that in terms of what they had at Barnet in terms of the players and whether or not they really structured the team around the players that they had or around what they wanted to do, if that makes sense. That was probably the imbalance.
So what were they trying to do at that point? Or from what you understood, what were they trying to do, all the periodization and strategy?
I mean, it was all about playing out through the thirds. It was all about playing from the goalkeeper, playing through the thirds. And I guess, like I say, there were elements. I mean, at the time in League Two, it was like unheard of. It was sort of unseen teams actually trying to pass the ball through the thirds. And there was some lovely moments, so to speak. But the team got relegated. So on the back of that, you kind of go, so where does... And again, that's my intrigue, really, is I look at things and try and sort of work out and think about, okay, so why might that have happened? Why did these things happen? But yeah, I guess it was just to see him and also his sort of input on training was minimal, really, to be honest. But then when it was, when he wanted something, it was done, if that makes sense. So it was kind of like leave it to the assistant, leave it to the coaches, because he was playing as well at the time. So that was interesting, really, really interesting to see. And I'll never forget as well, I asked him who the top manager the top coach, because again, I was intrigued. So I was like, I just want to know. And he said, Carlo Ancelotti. And I was like, Carlo, yeah, of course, Carlo Ancelotti. And I was like, okay, and why is that? And he was like, what a player. He was like, I was like, oh no, that's my coaching career ended. Yeah, he was like, he used to, like, he was the best player in the Rondo all day long. I was like, oh no, that's literally me done.
The little part of him still wanted him to be able to play and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. But and again, like little things that they did significantly every day. Like they'd always do rondos, they'd always do a possession. Probably didn't do enough goal scoring or defending of the goal, if I'm honest. But that's something I'm speaking in my opinion. Obviously, that they might go, well, no, whatever. But yeah, no, that was, like I say, that was interesting to see him work, and was very different to Mark, who was sort of alongside him at the start as well. Mark was probably more team structured of what I saw, and probably more based around what the players that he had and how he was going to get the best out of them, if that makes sense, rather than his system. So yeah, that was interesting. But then, yeah.
So, in terms of you moving forward, obviously we'll kind of elaborate on your career further, but did that present any challenges for you if you were going into an under-18s or a first-team environment where you were like, do I go in with a system that I want to play and force the players to be able to do it, or do I cater my system to what the players can do, hope that I can stay in the job long enough to then be able to get players in potentially that can do my system better? Did that kind of cause issues for you moving forward?
No, like 100%. So I think it was like a real learn on the job type moment, because it was almost like I was helping the first team in terms of coaching with the first team at times, and watching their training sessions and feeling that. And then at the same time, looking at the youth team and kind of literally instantly importing that, if you like, and thinking, actually, maybe I'm trying to, like you say, suggest my system. And actually, that's not what I need to do. I need to think about the players that I've got. So it was like literally a collision of what I'm watching and actually what I'm doing. And maybe I'm trying to do exactly what they're doing. But when I'm seeing them doing it, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I wouldn't do that. But it's all right for me. So yeah, it was definitely a huge learning curve and a huge learning moment. And definitely that, like I say, we massively overachieved as a Barnet youth team in a Cat 2 sort of games programme, in terms of holding our own and just getting players, people looking at players, clubs looking at players at Barnet, and you're like, what's going on there? And paying good money for players, and then, like I say, league appearances as well. That's what I'd class as success. So, but we also finished like 7 out of 12 or 14 in the league, which again is not deemed a success, but like I say, just overachieving. And that was probably generally because whatever players I had available, I would try and fit the system to them. So whatever we could do with those players, we would do. And I made that really clear for the players in terms of, this is why we're playing like this today, is because this is what we've got.
And obviously that, I guess, to a degree, challenges kind of EPPP format, in terms of EPPP likes you to have maybe a classified style of play, or, you know, academies playing similar to how the first team does, so there's a filter through. Do you think, is that something that's challenged you later on in terms of being able to integrate systems into your academy teams, or is it something that you've just parked for the time being, and if you went into a more senior role, you would go and look to do that again? How does that look for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the biggest difficulty with with academy football really is that you've got however many players you've got within your age group. You've got, say, 16 different players, and you're trying to improve 16 different players in 16 different ways. And let's be honest, when you play whatever system you play, I'd like to use a system personally that will help as many of those players. So the percentages are higher, if that makes sense. And there might be, on a specific day, there might be 3 or 4 players that are going to have to fit into a system so that 7 or 8, if you like, can be in their perfect system, if that makes sense. But also within that, I think it's healthy to challenge as well. So I know that Saints used to be quite big on, I'm not sure if they still are, but they used to be quite big on sort of playing in a number of positions to sort of learn why your opposition might play in a certain way. And I think that's also healthy. So, but I think that has to come with a plan rather than just we're going to play 4-4-2 every week, and so everyone's going to fit into our system. Because I think that then goes into the, dare I say it, the traditional English schooling system, like takeaway football, of like everyone sits in the classroom, everyone looks at the board, everyone writes with the same pen, and do you know what I mean? It's like that's not individual at all, and we want these individuals to be brilliant, the best they can be, and I don't think we're catering for that. So I think, yeah, there's definitely an element that I would try and also implement and support wherever I am, really, of trying to encourage that, definitely.
Yeah, I think the example I always use is, and again, I've said this before in a podcast, but as a Spurs fan, I've looked at it with Arsenal, although to be fair to Arteta, he's changed it around quite well, is they have like 2 number 9s in Lacazette and Aubameyang, and then they went and bought Pepe as a right winger. So then you're looking at it and going, well, someone's playing out of position.
Yeah.
And I use the example that having 2 number 9s, is there ever a point where actually we play a formation that they get to play together? So they get the use of combination off of that, one going a little bit longer, one fronting up, the runs off of it, be it as a 3 at the back or a diamond midfield or something like that. Because I think quite a lot in academy football, you'll get 4-2-3-1 or you'll get 4-3-3, but very rare will you end up with 2 strikers. And I think that, if clubs are all willing to explore that type of area, I think it would really benefit players. Could you just see him in different areas of the pitch, which maybe you go, actually, he's really good in that role? Or I thought his movement was great, but his movement's great when he plays up front by himself. When he's got someone else there, he just runs into the space and doesn't understand how to play off someone. And I think that's something that probably I would hope we'd look towards moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is. I think that's in my opinion personally, I think that's just an array of, like you've said, like you might have a number 9 that you think is excellent, and then because he's excellent, has he always just played in the same position, in the same system, with similar players around him against different opposition? So yeah, okay, every game is going to be slightly different, but he's always been in, like you say, if you stuck someone next to him, you suddenly go, well, actually, his value as a footballer is actually less than we thought it was, because, like you say, he makes really bad runs when he's next to someone else, and maybe we need to teach that. Maybe we need to work on that a little bit. And he always comes to feet, and is he going to stretch play? And then if coaches are looking from the outside going, well, he never stretches play, then well, we had a really good example of that actually, just quickly at Watford, and I won't mention any names obviously, but the first team manager at the time and our youth team captain was the best player really, obviously being captain, and I remember, never forget, the first team manager basically saying, look, we play a 4-4-2 in the first team, and you're telling me this lad is like one of the best players. He's like, can he go box to box? And I'll never forget, because he'd always played a single pivot, so he wasn't a box to box midfielder, and he'd been like the best player for years, and it was like, ouch. So within our system, like the way that we've taught him to be, has actually not killed him from having a career, but has stumped his career here particularly. that was a real wake up call at a young age, to exactly like you've just asked, really, to go, actually people need a variety, and variety is the spice of life, right? So so you've got to change things up, haven't you? You've got to mix things up a little bit. Like, I always think, how did Philip Lahm become one of the best left backs ever, being right footed? Like, how did that happen? I'd love to know. I'd love to ask someone.
He got palmed out there because there was a bigger, better right back, adapted, and all of a sudden, bloody hell, he's good, isn't he?
I bet, and exactly, and I bet that's not far off the truth. And that's what I'd love to know. I'd love to find that out and go, yeah, like you say, probably just got slung out there. Oh, go on, Phil, you go and play left back. All right, I'll be the best in the world.
So, in terms of, for you, moving on from Barnet, so you spent a few years there, and as you alluded to, you've had some success with players progressing and that type of stuff. What was your next move from there?
So then, from there, got a phone call from Cambridge United, who'd just been promoted to League Two, and quite an interesting sort of but strange story behind it. I sort of phoned my mum and said, "Oh, I've just had a phone call from Cambridge. I don't know whether to accept the job." And she was like, "Oh yeah, you'll meet someone up there that is going to be really important in your life," which has been. So Graham Daniels, who was on the board of directors and heads up like a charity called Christians in Sport, and he was like, he's been momentous in just my development and just being around as a human. He's an unbelievable human. But so I took the job at Cambridge, and again that was really sort of humbling experience, really a development field experience, because again I was driving minibuses and washing kit and just things I never sort of expected when I first walked through the door, to be honest. But what I will say is the club had all the sort of values that probably Barnet didn't, if that makes sense, which kind of drew me towards it. But also had a really, really young, like it wasn't an academy, it was the first year it had been an academy. So everything that we did was kind of like learning on the job, and I guess part of the reason that I was there really was with some sort of experience at the time of doing it. So yeah, had a really good 2 years there, and sort of ended up being head of coaching as well, because a couple of people progressed, so overlooking the programme as well.
I guess at that stage you're then looking at, shaping curriculums, or shaping, I guess to a degree, coaches and how they interact with the kids and stuff. What type of things did you look to implement at that time to, I guess, fulfill the vision of how you saw football/coaching should be?
Interesting you ask, Mike, because last couple of days I've had a couple of conversations around this actually, and something that I find really interesting in football is that sort of first team managers are generally employed because of their style or how they are, what they do, and then they'll generally employ coaches on their style or what they do. And I get it with academy coaches, because there are many academy coaches that are not so experienced, but I think a bit like players, in my opinion, and maybe I am a total purist, but I think it's too often that people are employed and then told what to do, if that makes sense. So I kind of think to myself, well, I guess my interview process would be, I'll really want to get to know ex-coach, and okay, there might be some people that talk a good game and totally take you down a blind alley, but I want to know behaviours and his or her behaviours and his or her philosophy as such, but how they're going to coach is going to make our group better, if that makes sense. What they're going to bring to the party is going to make our group better, rather than me going, well, I'm heading up the academy, so this is how we're going to do it, if that makes sense. Of course, I think I do believe you've got to have some sort of structure in terms of a syllabus and a program, but I do think that each coach, because otherwise, in my opinion, you just feel like demotivated closed in, caged coaches. And I've seen many of those across the years, and they just become egos, and they become the sort of spindlers in the background that go and tell little tales on each other, and that's not for me an environment. So I guess just really living to my values and being quite open about my values, and sort of saying, right, this is how football I would like the programme to look. And like I say, that is maybe a bit purist, but yeah. So
I guess what you kind of alluding to there is the more diverse a coaching group you have, the more experience coaches get from, or kids get, sorry, from their coaches, which then obviously helps them progress, because you might have one coach who teaches crossing and finishing in one particular way, might be off mannequins, compared to another that does it all opposed. But by having that diversity, you're providing a better, well-rounded education, rather than going, this is a syllabus, this is exactly what you have to do.
Absolutely. Like, genuinely, I couldn't agree with that more. And I think when you've got a player, like let's talk in purist terms, that comes in at under nines and goes all the way through the system and plays in the first team, and they've had all those, like you say, they've done 3,000 finishing sessions, but in totally different formats. I would like to think that player is still motivated, because every time they do a finishing session, it probably looks different. And like you say, they've probably learned and picked up lots of different things from the differences. So, like you say, I think that's crucial. And I'll never forget, and hopefully he won't mind me quoting this, but Neil Bath, there was a stage, and I don't know if they still do this at Chelsea, but there was a stage at Chelsea where his sort of mantra to recruit coaches or staff in general was sort of 33%, and that was 33% of like ex-professionals, in terms of could be within the club or without the club, 33% of scholars, non-football scholars, so educated scholars, people that have been in university education, so they're bringing a different game, if you like, and then 33% of actually young people that have come through the club that haven't finished up with a playing career. So, for example, Joe Edwards being one of those. And I remember just hearing that and thinking, like you say, like you've got such a good mix then of so many conversations, and probably a lot of conflict at times, but that's good. As long as you can have that conflict and obviously move on from it, but that's really good. And I just remember thinking about that and thinking, you know what, that's probably a really good sort of loose mantra to work by in terms of trying to engage different cultures, really.
I think, yeah, as you said there, alluding to conflict, because what you read in academic research is different to what you experience at first team level, and you know, people that have been through the club and have that identity. It's quite a nice way of trying to bring all that type of stuff together. Okay, this is going to be quite a challenging question for you, but I'd be interested to hear your thing. So, obviously, you're head of coaching and you're employing people that you want them to kind of express themselves, I guess. What do you think their opinion of you would be as a head of coaching, in terms of the support that you gave them or the ownership that you gave them and stuff?
I think to answer the question honestly, I think they would say supportive, but driven. So like I would challenge things all the time. So some people might get really frustrated by challenge, but I think I'm pretty sure everyone that I've sort of coached, developed, would know that at the heart of anything that I challenge or any standards is the player in question. So, or the group that they're working with. It's never the actual coach, if that makes sense. It's not because I don't see them as a good coach, because otherwise I would never have employed them as such. It would be, are the individuals getting what they need in terms of what we're delivering? So if there's a better way to do it, or maybe there's a more efficient way to do it that I have seen, I'd probably challenge, but and sometimes maybe challenge slightly abruptly, but not really, probably more supportive.
Do you think it challenged your beliefs? Because one thing I really like doing is watching either people I don't know or people I haven't worked with extensively or that have slightly different background to me work, because I always feel I can pick something else up that, because they're so different to me, the idea of how they do it is really different. So therefore I can pick something up. Do you feel like being in that role, you were able to gain a lot of insights into like your coaching or how you could change the way that you act to help players in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, something that I'm, again, like I say, going back to the individuals, I will often ask players like their opinion of me, and that's not like after I've built a rapport. So it's not like a trip up. You wait and and you'll be out on your ear. It's more like what could I have given you more of today? And sometimes it'll be planned for me as well in terms of I want to see, because I know I could have given them more of that, and I want to see if they pick up on that. So that I'm not saying I'm skillful, but that is a skill. Um, and I guess in terms of that, I think the learning parts would be just, again, the timing probably. I think a huge part of that is timing. I sort of remember an abrupt moment with a specific coach, but there was a really good player at Peterborough who was who's in around the first team now, and I didn't feel within this particular session he was being at all challenged, for example. And it was just a moment where I literally just sort of stepped in. I'd had a conversation on the side and asked the question, and the particular coach just didn't really understand how to challenge that player further. So I just sort of stepped in and showed, if you like. And the player was sort of more challenged straight away, but at the same time, it was like step back and ask the coach, and he felt really undermined. So that was a huge learning curve for me, because it was like I'm definitely not trying to undermine you at all, even though I'm effectively your boss anyway. But it was like I'm not trying to undermine you, certainly not in front of the players. But I do also want the players to understand that we're driving the standards for them. So I'm not going to accept okay, if that makes sense. Because as I say, like genuinely at the heart of everything, like, I wouldn't enjoy doing the job if it wasn't for the players that you're working with, really.
And did that present any issues moving forward?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'll be honest with you, Mike. So yeah, there's been. I mean, there were a couple of times where I stuck up for players. Because also we've got to remember that a lot of them are sort of adolescents as well. That in terms of, but even the ones that aren't, even the young pros I've worked with as well, they're young people, and sometimes are treated or mistreated, I should say, um, in my belief. So I think just standing up for players, and that probably didn't help me too much when I was at Peterborough, but um, it was quite a forceful sort of headbutting game. But in fairness, so to fill you in a little bit, I guess myself and the director of football and the chairman sort of butted heads, and I guess if you're ever going to butt heads with anyone, you probably don't want to butt heads with them. But actually, they came around and said, "Look, we've spoken to a few other members of staff, and actually, what you're trying to do is the right thing." So it actually sort of died down, and then later on, had another sort of falling out just because a senior member of staff spoke to a couple of young players in a totally disrespectful manner, and I just said, I don't. You might be a senior member of staff, but that's not in any way how we should be speaking to sort of our younger players. So yeah, that it's fallen on me a few times, definitely. But like I say, at the heart of it, it's got to be the player, isn't it? So.
And do you think when you've progressed after there and moved on forward, it's helped you to address those types of situations more and kind of keep having the player at the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, I think, like I say, like there's something. I mean, that is my sort of strongest passion, and I guess sometimes probably over enthusiastic about it or over passionate, if you like. But I think just my values really are quite strongly ingrained in me, and I think that leads to speaking to individuals in certain ways. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we all do, but there's that further step that I just personally, whether it was within a club that I'm working with or not. I remember having an argument with another youth coach one day during the game, just because the way he spoke to the referee, and it ended up me and him having like a little tiz on the sideline. And I was like, listen, if he wants to throw his hands up and give up, we haven't got a game. So just I guess that sort of, like I say, the values that I carry quite strongly, I guess. So yeah,
it's important to have those things, common decency, and you can tell people and critique people and stuff, and at times you might need to give them a bit of a rocket, as it's called. Yeah. But there's constructive ways to do it, and there's other ways that's kind of demeaning and all that type of stuff, which is obviously, when you're trying to develop young people, is the way that you don't want to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to loop this back round to something you mentioned at the start, which is something I actually, on a course recently, spoke to a few people about, which was interesting, which is different areas propose different issues, or it's very diverse from area to area. Do you just want to talk through kind of your experiences? Because obviously you've gone through a lot of clubs there, from Watford to Barnet, Peterborough, and obviously where you are and living now. For you, how have you found the diversity in areas, and what changes and challenges have you seen going from club to club or region to region?
Yes, I mean, it's so bizarre, because it's not like, it's too broad to say each area is. You definitely can't say that. However, there's probably percentages within each area that you kind of strongly get to see, and I think Watford is a real interesting one, because Watford's actually a really wealthy part of the country, and in and around Watford is actually a really wealthy part of the country. So you've got the kind of leafy London boy, if you like, and then you've got the street kid London boy as well. And I think that actually, genuinely, I thought that brought such a healthy clash, because you've almost got the leafy boys leaving training like, yeah, man, yeah, we can do this, bruv. And then you've got the inner street London boy going, what are you talking about? But it raised loads of cultural differences within that, and people, like, it was the first, well, Barnet and Watford were the first times really it had been raised in my mind, without anyone raising it, where I was watching sort of people's behaviours, players or young people's behaviours, and thinking, right, rather than saying anything, I'm just going to ask. So I'm not going to impose my thoughts on them. I'm just going to ask and just say, for example, player X, so how's your day been? How did you get to training? And just those questions, over sort of three and a bit years, whatever, it was just unbelievable. Like, some of the feedback that you get, and all of a sudden, not to say you take your foot off the standards of what you're delivering, but you suddenly have a different outlook on how you might speak to someone, because you suddenly realise that actually he had a detention at school, he feels like that was unfair, and then because of his detention he missed the train, so then he blah 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 had to, don't know, and he's borrowed a pair of boots and whatever, and he's still trying to be an academy footballer. And you're like, all of a sudden you're thinking, wow, don't get detention. Number one thing, don't get detention, simple, but actually everything that you've done to get yourself here on time is plaudable, really. And you kind of, once you start to, and then you've got another lad that, and everyone's in a different situation, but mum and dad are very wealthy. Mum doesn't work, so he gets dropped to training 45 minutes before with a Costa coffee in his hand and packed away, pump, like, do you know what I mean? Little tap on the bum, off you go, go on, go training you. And yeah, and I mean, again, speaking to one of the lads from Watford actually the other day, and speaking about two of the lads in our group, and he goes, do you remember the fights them two used to have? And I won't mention any names again. And like, two of the lads were in the group. He's like, do you remember the fights them two used to have, like, just before and during and after training? I was like, oh, I used to love it. I used to absolutely love it, because not out of hand fights, but it would be like fisticuff, like, you know, the classic like stand up, puff your chest out. And I'd kind of like let it roll for a little bit, and then I'd interject. But it was quite healthy, I think, for the rest of the group to see that, and also for them to be able to share their sort of backgrounds and cultures as well, and go, well, like without it, like I say, getting out of hand. But and then like something that sticks in my mind that I'll probably never lose is at Barnet. I remember one night walking through the training ground, like I was walking home, and like there were still coaches floating around, obviously, and it was like one of the under-10s, and I said to him, "Oh, what are you doing then? Where are your mum and dad?" And he was like, "Oh no, I've got to get the tube." And I was like, "All right, okay, get in the tube." And I was thinking, I'd say maybe 10 years old max. And I was like, oh, and I started walking off, and then I was like, hang on a minute, don't you live in, and basically his tube ride was like an hour across London. And I was like, I can't believe there's a 9-year-old doing this. And like, he wasn't the only one, if you know what I mean. But when it gets brought to your forefront and you think, wow, the amount of differences. And then, like I say, Peterborough and Cambridge, you've probably got a slightly more affluent areas, and certainly in the South Coast where I am now, slightly more affluent, slightly, but you've still got people that are not as wealthy. But yeah, really, really diverse and different upbringings, backgrounds, and areas bring certain sort of traits and personalities with them as well. Like people in the South Coast are slightly more laid back than people in London, probably just naturally because of the speed of life. I don't know. But yeah, so that's.
I think that's really interesting. I know there's been some academic studies on that, and like if you're living in London, or this one was in New York, and they were saying because of the pace of it, people actually walk quicker in London than they do outside, just because it is the pace of life. You have to get to somewhere to beat someone to get places, whereas, you know, the places that aren't as hectic or as busy, you don't have to do those things.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a side to that. Just before I come to the last question, because I appreciate we're almost out of time, did this help you when you went into first team environment? Kind of those learnings, do you feel like actually appreciating the person, the fact, you know, they may have had a tear up with their missus, or mum or dad might be ill, or they've had a nightmare, they've crashed their car on the way to train or something like that. Do you think those type of learnings gave you a better understanding when you went into the first team environment?
Oh, 100%. And don't get me wrong, like some people will say the coach, the manager, whatever, the assistant, need to be cut off from the person and driven, and it's all about the football and the result. So different people have different approaches, but I remember just generally noting the behaviour of one of the sort of, and he was a senior pro, but one of the younger pros at Peterborough. And I remember over 2 or 3 days, I just watched his body language sort of like degenerate, if you like. And so I pulled him one day after breakfast and just said, "Look, everything all right?" And anyway, he had some emotional moment. But it was really interesting because at the upshot of that conversation was, he was like, "Do you know, no one's ever had a conversation with me other than football." And he'd been a pro for like 4 or 5 years, and he was like, no one's actually really engaged in a conversation about am I all right and stuff like that. But so that was a standout moment. But I've always sort of, like I say, the person's always been at the centre. So I guess I have had conversations, and I guess that kind of goes back to your point earlier, is I've never felt intimidated by asking a human how they're feeling, if that makes sense, whoever they might be and whatever name they've got that makes them slightly more famous to other people, if that makes sense. I've never been intimidated by that. So I guess for me that makes it quite important, because actually we always find out somewhere along people's journeys, don't we, however popular or famous they might be. Lionel Messi went through a tough time at 13, 14 years old. Well, I wonder how many people had a conversation with him. Probably quite a lot, because he was like on the brink of being the world's best footballer, if that makes sense. But regardless of being the world's best footballer, I still think it's really important, especially in youth development, where we know that the figures aren't great. That actually we got to go. They're people first, and like you say, in first team environments, they are still people first. And I think personally, there's always an element of, if you get the buy-in from the person, if the person knows, and it's that old saying, but if the person knows that you care, then they'll probably care more about what you're telling them, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's sort of crucial to how I would work as such. And
I think it's interesting. I think I was watching, and it's just a very dramatised version. I was watching Invictus over the weekend, which is about the rugby with Nelson Mandela and stuff, and they showed a scene of him learning all the players' names. And I always think, well, what I was thinking, and I have thought about it before, that's a really easy way to get players buy-in, is just learning like kids' names, just so you can say to them, oh, how's Tom, how's whoever, how's Liam, how's Katie. Being able to just ask them, that little thing might be enough, going, bloody hell, he's taken 5 minutes out of his day to learn my kid's name, to know it's their birthday or something like that, which might be that 1% extra buy-in when tough times going rough, where they go, no, he's a decent guy, I'm going to dig in a little bit more. So I think, linking it back to caring about the person and then being able to care about the player creates that positive environment overall.
Definitely, and I think that's something that to see at the elite level and speak about at the elite level, I think like it's been quite well documented now. But you look at like Liverpool and Klopp, but even like what you just mentioned there, like I'm sure you've seen the videos of like when they're singing "Happy Birthday" to each other in a variety of languages, because obviously it's multicultural. Football is multicultural, and like little things like that, I think, are overlooked, if that makes sense. Like even as top performing athletes at whatever age they are, some are 34, some are 28, whatever, just that little sense of, like you say, oh, actually, yeah, he does care. Like they all do care. I'm important within this group. That means a lot, doesn't it? So, like you say, I think that's crucial. Like you say, even knowing their names and stuff like that, and also for parents as well. I think that's an important thing, isn't it? Oh, whoever Coach X actually has taken the time, whatever.
Yeah, I remember one occasion where I just asked. I knew one of the older brothers had been had a triathlon meet, and I just asked the little boys, oh, how did he get on? And he said he was only young, under 9 maybe, and he was like, yeah, he did all right, and ran and got a football and went off. And at the end of the session, the parents went, oh, thanks for that. And I was like, what do you mean? They went, well, thanks for asking how he'd got on. That was really nice.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's, for me, was a 5-second thing of just asking how it was, but to the kid and the family makes quite a big difference. And, they're going, oh, actually, he cares about him as a person, not just as the player. But listen, I appreciate we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to ask you one last question and I'll let you go. So I ask everyone this, and probably for you it comes in 2 things, which is, who's the best player you've worked with, and why? What made them a standout? And then who's the best coach you've kind of worked with or against, and why?
Oh, wow. I guess arguably similar to the answer earlier. I guess arguably the best player I've worked with, or maybe if I can nick 2, would probably be like Alexis Sanchez. And for the reasons I gave earlier, I think I was very fortunate to be able to be in that sort of position to do that. And probably just at the stage he is now and where he is now, I think probably Jadon Sancho as well would be up there. And I think something for both of them is that sort of continual drive, that drive and desire that they're things that stood out to me. Like I said about Sanchez, like just constantly wanting to be better on an international camp was just absolute standout. And don't get me wrong, technically he's also very good, Athletically, he's also very good, but just his continued desire and drive to, and Jaden the same really, as a sort of under 10 to an under sort of 14, he just constantly had that drive and desire to be the best, not only in his age group but in all the age groups. Like he was determined to play on the world stage basically. And then coaches wise, I'd probably like genuinely, and I don't mean this because like untoward if you like, but probably Jim Kelman, who I said at an early age was a real sort of inspiring figure for me, but was actually like genuinely one of the best coaches. I mean, he was way ahead of his time. So a lot of his own developed syllabuses and stuff like that were things that the FA then implemented like years after. And he was one of the first coaches to play in England with a back three and with wing backs, and just way ahead of his time in the systems and some of the things that he did. And then probably, fortunately, I was coached on a number of occasions by the dare I say it, the late great Dick Bate as well. So yeah, he would be up there in terms of his passion as well, his enthusiasm at a ripe age. Yeah, so probably those two. Sorry, I've nicked two on both. I haven't come up with one answer. I've sat on the fence.
That's fine. Listen, Tom, I appreciate your time. And yeah, it was a great conversation, and maybe we can catch up again at some other point, because I know we probably stopped about halfway through your career there, and I'm sure you've got interesting stories. But yeah, really appreciate your time, and I'm really good. Hope you enjoyed it.
No problem. Yeah, been excellent. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.